Hey, we are continuing our message series entitled A Thrill of Hope. A Thrill of Hope. As last week we kind of kicked it off, kind of talking about sort of how and really what hope is and what hope isn't. And one of the kind of the big concept of it is one of the biggest differences really between what we would say is biblical hope and worldly hope is that biblical hope has a way of showing up where it seems like it shouldn't. As a way of showing up where it seems like it shouldn't. In the middle of pain, in the middle of tears, in the middle of discouragement, in the middle of people's lives where when you look at what they're going through, you're like, how in the world is it possible that you can have hope right now? See, biblical hope shows up where it seems like it shouldn't. And maybe no story in the Bible reflects that message more than the actual Christmas story. The actual Christmas story, this story where in the mess of a manger, where the fears of a teenage girl, the doubts of this guy named Joseph, we find hope being born. We find hope being born. We find a hope through Jesus showing up where it seems like it shouldn't show up. But not just that. And here's kind of what I want to get to tonight. See, what I love about the Christmas story is that it doesn't just reveal to us where we find hope, but how we find it. But how we find it. See, central to the message is this, kind of the Christmas story is this theological term known as the incarnation. Maybe you've heard of that before. And the incarnation is a fancy way of saying God in the flesh. The Word became flesh. You read of it in John 1. Hope in the flesh. And here's what I'm getting at here, is that the Christmas story, when it comes to hope, it doesn't just shine a light on where we find it, but also shines a light on how we find it, how we rediscover it, and in some cases, how we rekindle it. As I put it in my notes this way, is that where we find hope is in Jesus, how we find hope is through other people. Where we find hope is in Jesus, how we find hope, how we encounter hope oftentimes is through other people. And can I tell you something? I've experienced this so many times in my life, but I experienced it firsthand this past week. Because this might come as a surprise to some of you, but sometimes even a pastor can go through times and seasons where he feels a little hopeless, where he goes through times where he feels a little discouraged, gets a little down on himself, gets a little down even on the ministry, gets a little down on stuff going on in life. And I'll be honest, these past couple of weeks, for me, I was at that place. Where I was just discouraged. And again, I realize that might be a surprise to some of you. If it's not, maybe I need to do a better job acting natural. If you were here last week, you'd get that and you'd put a smile on my face a little bit more. But again, it was a tough week. And so anyway, I'm sitting there this past whole week. It was on, I think it was Wednesday, and I'm just sitting there at a coffee shop in town, working on a message and trying to come up to something to say about finding hope in hopeless situations, even though I was feeling incredibly discouraged in that moment. And again, you know how hope has a way, biblical hope showing up where it seems like it shouldn't. Sure enough, right that moment, a pastor friend of mine that I hadn't seen in a long time just happens to show up. And he shows up and he grabs a seat right next to me, and he's like, "Hey man, haven't seen you in a long time. How you doing? How you doing?" And of course, like classic pastor response, "Man, God's good, right?" They act natural, it's good, all's good. And you can tell that what I was saying, and I wasn't saying with a whole lot of conviction. And so he just kind of follows it up. He's like, "Okay, how you doing really? Really?" Which, by the way, isn't it true that we're all just one really away from a breakdown? How you doing really? Just pour your life out. And that's what it was for me. Also, I'm just like, I spent the next 2 minutes. It was really more like 30 minutes, but it sounds more spiritual when I just say it was only 2 minutes. I just started sharing all the good, the bad, the ugly in my life. And we get done with it. He prays over me, heads off. And I don't know what it was. The funny thing is, I don't even remember anything that he said that particularly stood out to me, probably because I didn't give him any time to say anything. But I just remember the moment he left, after he was done praying, I felt so encouraged. Like all of a sudden, this hope that felt like it was flickering, all of a sudden just had new life again, had a new fire again. All of a sudden, I could see some things and see some potential and see a future where before I hadn't been able to see a future. And listen, I share that with you because because there was just something about reconnecting with him that changed my whole perception, my whole outlook on the situations of my life. And listen, I bring this up is because, listen, something you've got to get is whether you realize this or not, there's a direct correlation between your perception of life and the connections you have around your life. Your perception of life and the connections you have around your life. And maybe the best way I can think of actually illustrating this is by sharing the struggles of another person in the McRae household this past several weeks. And specifically Holly's struggles. Holly struggles with the Hallmark Channel. As for those of you who don't know, like she's got a problem. Like she's got a real problem. A problem that has dramatically interrupted our holidays. In fact, since Halloween, this problem has gotten so bad, we've actually had to invite some outside help into the situation. Some professionals to come and help Holly with this problem. This problem, this frustration she has with the internet cutting out every time she sits down to watch her favorite Christmas movie. I don't know what you guys thought I was going to say there. But the problem is that she watches too much. She does watch probably too much Christmas Hallmark movies. But anyway, it's been a struggle, and of course the frustrating part for her, and admittedly the times I sat down and watched it seems like the moment that the movie starts to take a turn for the hopeful side, because in every one of those movies it kind of starts off this crisis, seems like a hopeless situation, like the couple that you think is going to get together is never going to get together, and right about the moment it starts to take a turn for the better, that's when the internet seems to always just cut out. And we lose our picture, we lose our reception. And so we've had to, we've tried everything. Over the past several months, we've got on the phone, we've called, we've asked for help, we've got on the computer trying to figure out what's going on. And every time we reach out to them, every time we follow up on the computer, every time we give them a call, oftentimes they'll run a diagnostic test. And the diagnostic test, every single time, Bro's like, yeah, signal looks pretty good on our end. Like, signal looks good, everyone else in Toledo seems to have internet but you. and so their advice is always the same advice. And maybe you've heard this advice before. The advice is you need to check your connection. You need to check your connection. In fact, that's actually the title of my message tonight. You need to check your connection. Because, listen, it doesn't matter how good the signal is. If the connection is bad or the connection is lost, how many of you know it's going to affect what you see and how you see it? It's going to affect what you see and how you see it. What I'm trying to get at is sometimes we can get into situations in life that when we look around, all it looks like is a hopeless situation. When we look around, we can find ourselves kind of crying out and calling out to God and wondering, God, what's going on? I'm struggling to see how you're working in this. I'm struggling to see your goodness in this. I'm struggling to see what you're doing in this. And if we're not careful, we can mistakenly start to think that the problem is a problem with the signal. The problem is a problem with the signal. But listen to how the Bible describes the signal of God, the promises of God. Romans 8:28 says, all things work together for the good of those who love the Lord. In other words, the signal's good. God's plans for you are good. God's purpose for you is good. But listen, if your connection's bad, if your connection is lost, you're always going to struggle to see it. You're always going to struggle to see it. And listen, we've all experienced this reality positively and negatively. We've all had those moments where the connections in our lives, around our lives, are good. You've got some good people in your life. You've got some good friends in your life. You've got a good church community in your life. And isn't it amazing how much better, how much clearer the signal, the picture shows up in your life during those times. But when you have a bad connection, or even worse, you've lost connection. How many know when you're connected to bitter people, it's hard to see how anything could get any better. Amen. When you're always constantly connected to naysayers, it's hard to see how God could have a vision of more for your life. Again, so much of our perception of our life is shaped by the connections around our life. Shaped by the connections around our life. And so real quickly, before we get into how you establish good connections for your life, I want to just kind of run a quick little diagnostic test and kind of share some of the common issues, I think the most common connection issues some of us run into in our lives. And the first one is this, it's simply insecurities. It's insecurities. And listen, can I tell you, some of those that struggle with this the most is right here. It's pastors. Pastors are actually notorious for this. Where it's like we know a lot of people, but nobody really knows us.
Amen.
Which might explain why so many pastors in study after study struggle with loneliness, struggle with the feeling that they're on an island all alone at times. It's because the truth is, good connections and strong connections, they require something from us. And one of the things it requires from us is it requires vulnerability. It requires a vulnerability, this ability to be able to share the good, the bad, the ugly in our lives, to be fully known because I can trust at the end of that conversation I'll still be fully loved. It requires some vulnerability. And listen, don't get me wrong about this. And I encourage you to, when we're done tonight, to go on Facebook and just start sharing everything about your life to everyone out there. In fact, that's a surefire way to lose some connections in your life. But what I am saying is that everybody doesn't need to know everything about you, but there should be somebody who does. There should be somebody in your life who does. Maybe that's a friend, maybe that's a mentor, maybe that's a pastor. If you're married, it should certainly be a spouse. But there's got to be somebody you can be transparent with, someone you can be very open and honest and vulnerable with. Here's the other connection issue I think a lot of us run into is equitability. Equitability, and I put it on the screen there for you in case you don't know how to spell that. I had to look it up on Google multiple times. But so often we want good connections, but listen, we don't want to have to put any work into it, right? It's like, I want a good connection, but I don't want to have to put anything into this relationship. So we want somebody else to fix it. We want somebody else to establish it. We want somebody else to restore it. But I'm telling you, good connections don't just happen without some effort by everyone involved in that relationship. Everyone involved in that connection. In fact, I remember back in my middle school days coming home, and I remember one day in particular just complaining to my dad, like, I don't have any friends, Dad. Nobody likes me. No one wants to hang out with me. And I remember my dad just sit me down, and he goes, son, you want to know the secret to making friends? Here's the secret. Start by just being a good friend to others. And again, what he was getting at is that, listen, it's going to take some work. Good connections, there's two sides to the coin. You're going to have to put some effort into it. They don't just happen. It takes effort. It takes some work. Here's the other kind of connection issue, though, we oftentimes struggle with, and this is that we overestimate ourselves. We overestimate ourselves. This is where you don't think you need good connections. You don't think you really need people in your life. You don't think you really need good friendships or a good church. I can do this. I can handle this life on my own. I remember some years ago having a conversation with a lady, and I remember in the conversation as we were talking, I asked her, hey, do you go to church anywhere? And her response to me was simply this. She says, I don't do church. I don't do church. It's just me and Jesus. Jesus is all I ever need. And of course, on the surface, like, that sounds good, right? It sounds spiritual because there's some truth in that. I mean, Jesus is all you need when it comes to your eternity. He is all you need when it comes to eternity. But listen, Jesus didn't just come with the promise of eternal life. He also came with the promise of abundant life, life to the full. And listen, you can't live life to the full, a life abundant without other people. You can't be all who God created you to be without other people. Because listen, for us, when I'm by myself, listen, there can be a tendency to think I'm doing a lot better than I really am. I'm more spiritual than I really am. Because listen, I don't know if you found this to be true. I certainly found this to be true in my life. Is that when I'm by myself, and man, I'm an incredibly spiritual guy. Like when it's just me, myself, and like I'm the nicest guy in the world. Like when nobody's around, I'm the nicest guy. I enjoy my company. I'm not weighed down by myself. I'm really generous when nobody's around me. I buy myself gifts. I think of myself like all the time. Like I don't struggle with that, you know. And listen, I share that with you because listen, you don't really know where you're at with God. Why I bring this up? You don't really know where you're at with God. You don't really ever grow in your relationship with God until you get around other people. Because listen, it's when you get around other people that there's sort of this mirror put in front of your face where it's like this realization, whoa, maybe I'm not as generous as I think I am. Maybe I got some room to grow in this area of patience. Maybe I don't forgive the way that I think I do in my mind, right? See, the point is we need others to fully see God's work in our lives and realize, and get this, we also need others to fully see God's work realized through our lives as well. Which brings us to sort of one of the key texts we're going to kind of camp on for the rest of our time tonight. And really the why and how we establish good connections for our life. In this text, we find it in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 6. And just to give a little context here, basically this is a letter. This is basically advice, it's encouragement written by Paul to a young up-and-coming pastor named Timothy. See, Paul is getting to the point where he's getting ready to sort of pass the torch of his ministry on to this next pastor. And so he's giving him some advice. He's giving him some direction. And I love the advice he gives to young Timothy, this guy. Before he sends him out, here's the advice he gives him. He says, 2 Timothy 1:6, it says, I want to remind you to fan into flame the gift of God which is in you through the laying on of my hands. Which is in you through the laying on of my hands. In other words, Timothy, what you got to get, and what you need to know is that you're going to encounter some hard times. Like in your ministry and in your life and in your relationships, you're going to come into some times and you're going to run into some days where your hope's going to flicker. Some times where you get down on yourself, where you get down on those around you. Some times where your strength is going to fade, where times where you're going to struggle to find the joy of your salvation. And listen, when you go through those times, it is mission critical for you to make sure that you have some good connections in your life. To make sure that you got some people in your life who are willing to come alongside you, put their arm around you. So some people who especially when you're going through difficult times, are willing to pick you up when you fail and hold you up when you want to give up. You got to have those people. It's mission critical. And listen, this was more than just some pregame pep talk by Paul to Timothy. This is more than just, hey, this is. I heard this once. Somebody told me this. I'm passing it along to you, Timothy. Hope it works. No, Paul was speaking from experience. He had been through some stuff. He had been through some difficult times. He had been through some hard times. And he understood the importance of making sure to have good connections around your life. See, this was birthed out of experience because how many of you know, Paul, he would go on to do some great things. He would go on to do amazing things in the ministry. But he didn't do those great things by himself. Listen, he didn't get to where he got to by himself. Where he got to, and trust me, he got a long way. God used him, God worked through him to do some pretty amazing things. In fact, if you're unfamiliar with Paul, just some of the things that God would work to do in Paul's life. Listen, Paul was responsible for, get this, writing 2/3 of the New Testament. 2/3 of the New Testament. The bulk of what you read in that second half of your Bible, man, was written, inspired through the Holy Spirit working through Paul to write that. And he wrote it during a span of 3 missionary trips across Asia Minor. And again, he didn't do any of this alone. He didn't do any of this alone because, listen, just like your perception of your life is often shaped by the connections around your life, the perception of your life is often shaped by the connections around your life. How many of you know so can the direction of your life be shaped by those very same connections around your life? And in fact, it's been said, show me your friends and I'll show you your future. There's a connection between the connections we have around us and the direction that God takes us. And in fact, we see this. And we see this, interestingly enough, actually through the people that Paul has connected in his life, invites along these 3 missionary journeys. Now, we don't have time to unpack every single person that he brought along on these missionary journeys, but I did just want to highlight a few of these. In fact, one of my favorite ones we see in his very first missionary trip, and we read of this, Acts 13:2. It says, while they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, basically he's leading Paul out, setting Paul out, pushing Paul out to this first missionary trip. And he says, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work to which I have called them. Now, Now Barnabas is really the key name I want you to get there. And I love this because each of these names, you got to understand, the names of the people that he brings along, they mean something. Back in biblical times, names, they meant more than sometimes our names mean. Like, we'll name kids Apple or Dallas it doesn't really mean anything. But back then, names had significance. Names had meaning. And certainly Barnabas had some pretty cool meaning to it. See, the name Barnabas was actually made up of two words, a bar and nabu. Bar meaning a son, and a nabu meaning encouragement. So the name Barnabas literally means son of encouragement. In other words, it's the Holy Spirit's leading Paul to step out in faith, to step out his missionary journey. He says, listen, hey Paul, before you go, you're going to need some good connections in your life. Because you're going to run up against some times. You're going to run up against some hardships where you're going to get discouraged. And listen, you're going to need some people in your life who will encourage you. In fact, the very definition of encouragement is to speak courage into somebody. You're going to need a Barnabas, someone to speak courage when you're doubting. Speak courage in your life when you're fearful. Speak courage in your life when you want to turn back. You've got to have that Barnabas. And so he sends him out on that first missionary journey with this guy, Barnabas, this guy known for encouragement. In his third missionary journey, here's another one. He sends them with a guy by the name of Luke. Luke, do you know what the name Luke means? It means a light. More specifically, a light in the darkness. In other words, hey Paul, before you go, you need to know that, in case you don't already know, that you don't know everything. Amen. But that's okay, because you don't have to. I'm sending you with some counsel. I'm sending you with some good counsel, some good wisdom. I'm sending you with a guy by the name of Luke, a guy who can help you navigate those dark times when you're unsure where to step, you're unsure where to go, you're unsure of the decisions ahead. Here's another one. So he sends out Luke, and this one actually comes about in the second missionary journey. We see a guy by the name of Onesiphorus. Onesiphorus. And his name literally means to add value to. Add value to. Isn't that cool? You know, speaking of connection issues, a lot of us, we struggle to step out and establish good connections because if we're honest, we doubt we have anything to add value to in terms of that relationship. Like, what do I have to give? And can I tell you something? I found that when I look at some of the closest friendships, some of the best friendships I've had in my life, are people who are just simply willing to give what they have. Give what they got, right? Even if all you've got is a listening ear, even if all you've got is a willingness to pray over them, even if all you've got is an encouraging word. It's just being there. It's just showing up for someone. So we got this person. We need to add a value to it. And listen, here's why I bring this up. Because again, if we're not careful, I think especially when we look at our lives, when we look at the situations in our lives, we can have a tendency to think of relationships, we can have a tendency to look at friendships, and we can almost kind of treat it like the exit aisle on a plane. Anyone ever gotten on a plane and you've gotten the exit aisle seat?
Yes.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's like free first class. I mean, you get like an extra 7 inches of leg room on there. It's incredible. I've gotten it a couple times. It's awesome. Now, I don't know if you've actually experienced this, but if you've ever been on a plane and if you're on the exit aisle, the stewardess oftentimes they'll come over and they're always typically really nice about it. But you know, oftentimes I got my headphones on, and so they'll tap me on the shoulder and they'll just kind of ask this question. It's interesting how they ask it because they always ask it so casually. And the question is, hey, are you able, or are you willing to, if the plane were to have any issues, to be able to open the exit door? And of course, my response is just as casual. I'm like, well, yeah, sure. Now think about this though. You know, when you really think about the question, now think about the question you're asking. You know, because so often, again, like we hear that, and our response can be so casual, and even how they ask it can be so casual. But really, when you think about what they're asking you to do in that moment, like what they're asking you really to do is basically, hey, I need to know if this plane goes on fire, are you the kind of person to run into a burning building to save somebody, or are you going to run away? And what they're really asking is, hey, are you willing to be responsible for all 188 lives and passengers on this plane if it goes down?
I mean, that's what they're asking. And it, like, you know, when I think about that, when it's like if I really thought about it, if I really thought about my response, I don't think it would be as casual of a response as I previously made. Like, if I really thought about it, I mean, I have to think about it. Like, am I the kind of person to run into a burning building? I mean, I like to think I am, but I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I mean, I'm only sitting here because I wanted the extra 7 inches of like seating. Like, if I'm honest, the guy back in 21C, he looks way more able for this job than me. And look, I share that with you because, again, we can approach our connections, we can approach our relationships with that same sense of casualness. Like, seems like a good idea. Yeah, I need some Lukes in my life. I need some Barnabases in my life. Yeah. I mean, I'll take it. Be great. Be good. Take it or leave it, though. You know, nice if I get it. I'm okay, though, if I don't. But listen, what I'm trying to get across to you is, listen, as we're going to discover in this story, and specifically in Paul's second missionary journey, listen, the connections you have can be a matter of life or death. It can be a matter of life or death of a dream, life or death when it comes to getting over an addiction, life or death when it comes to a marriage, when it comes to a relationship. The connections that you have, the connections that you keep, it can make all the difference in the world. And again, we see this because in the second missionary journey, we're going to see Paul ending up in a very hopeless situation. And we see it in Acts chapter 16. Here he's been preaching, and of course the community, the town he's preaching to, they didn't really care for what he was preaching. They didn't care for what he was saying. And as a result, they ended up kind of falsely accusing him of some stuff and throwing him into prison. Him and ultimately Silas, another guy we're going to discover here in just a moment. And in fact, this is actually one we're going to kind of read this. This is Acts 16, starting verse 22. And this guy shares the story, shares a moment of this seemingly hopeless situation. It said the crowd had joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrates ordered them to be stripped and beaten with rods. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. When he received these orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet into stocks. That's going to become important here a little bit later on in the story, because if you don't know, biblical stocks, basically, I think we got a picture of some of these biblical stocks. They're like a piece of wood, and they would have these 4 holes that would kind of attach your feet so you couldn't move. But interesting enough, they would attach you with somebody. All right, so anyway, keep that in the back of your mind. We're going to come back to that. But verse 25 says, about midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once all the prison doors flew open, and everyone's chains came loose. Amen. It's an incredible story, right? And I love that. But to really understand the significance of the story, and especially where we're getting to, is something you got to understand is that before he ever gets to this point, and why I say our connections can be a matter of life or death, is because before he ends up in this prison cell with Silas, listen, he had to make a choice between Silas and another guy. And the other guy, he had an option of taking with him, was a guy by the name of Mark. Now, do you know what Mark's name happens to mean? And I apologize if you're a Mark. I'm sure there's nothing like this. But anger and defensive. Anger and defensive. And surely enough, it was very apropos of who Mark was. See, Mark in the first missionary journey had really kind of let Paul down. And had really, just been a trouble, been a thorn in his side the whole time. And so before he even sets off on this missionary trip, these guys, they got their bags, they're heading to the boat, and you got Paul all of a sudden, he's like, whoa, Mark, where do you think you're going? I'm going with you. No, you're not. No, you're not. It's like, listen, I can't be fighting demons on one side and be struggling and dealing with you on the other side. It's not, I can't do it. And instead of choosing Mark, he chooses another guy. He brings along Silas. Now Silas's name is really cool too, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we get to Silas's name, there's something you got to understand. And again, why it comes back to why I say this is sort of a matter of life or death. And in fact, I want to make sure I get this out to you. I haven't put this in my notes. I think it's so true, and I don't want to just skip over this. But listen, when it comes to that choice of who you have in your life, who you don't, listen, you may not get to choose what you go through in life, but you do get to choose who you go through it with. You do get to choose who you go through it with. And man, I'm so glad that Paul chose Silas. Because think about it. Think about if he'd chosen Mark. Can you imagine him in Acts 16? The misery of that? I told you shouldn't have said what you said. Well, I told you. I tried telling you. We shouldn't have gone to this town. We should have gone the other way. I tried. I mean, oh my goodness. You can just imagine the frustration and the hopelessness of that would have just fed into Paul. Because something you got to understand about Paul is that Paul, he had a real struggle to see the glass half full. He was a glass half empty guy. In fact, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. Where we talked about how Paul had to learn to be content. Because he was not a natural optimist. And in fact, if you doubt that, all you got to do is actually just read some of his words. He had an ability to sort of see the worst in himself, sometimes the worst in the situation. In fact, check some of these out. 1 Corinthians 15:9 says, I'm the least of the apostles. And I don't even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecute the church of God. I've got murder. I've got a past on my rap sheet, in other words. Ephesians 3:8, I'm the least of all the Lord's people. 1 Timothy 1:15, Jesus came into the world to save sinners, amen, of which I'm the worst. Romans 7:18 through 19, for I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out, for I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I don't want to do, this I keep on doing. Oh, now, in Paul's defense, again, he would learn joy. He would learn content. And when you look at these passages, he would come to follow them all up with incredible statements of faith. But the grace of God. God loves me. God's got a plan for me. I mean, you follow it all up with those kind of statements. But again, I share that because you got to understand, like, he struggled with this. He struggled with being able to see the hope in hopeless situations. And so again, you got to imagine the scene here. Here he is. He's locked up. And again, thankfully, he's not locked up with Mark. He's locked up with another guy. Locked up with a guy by the name of Silas. Now again, I told you that name, it means something. Are you ready for it? You ready for what Silas means? Check it out. Wood. Some of you are like, well, that doesn't seem very revelatory, but get with me. Stick with me on this. And imagine, here you got Paul. He's in prison. It's cold. It's dark. He's discouraged. He's feeling defeated. He's ready to quit. And listen, when your hope starts to flicker in life, when the passion for God, the passion for the things God's calling you to do, what do you actually need most in those situations? You need some fuel. You need some kindling. You need a Silas. And so again, you got to imagine here, here's Paul. He's in this prison and he's just beating himself up. He's seeing the worst in himself, the worst in the situation. And he's like, it's kind of, it starts the whole Paul road. It's like, oh, woe is me. I'm getting what I deserve. I knew it. I knew I shouldn't have gone this way. He's just kicking himself. And so here he is, and he's just down on himself. And he's like, man, there's nothing. There's nothing I can seem to do right. There's nothing I can do to get us out of this situation. Well, over here, you got Silas. And Silas, he's listening to this. And as he, Paul's talking about, man, there's nothing I can do. It's over. You got Silas, and man, that kind of reminds me of something I heard once. Yeah. Reminds me of a song that he used to sing. Wait, what? How'd it go? What can wash away my sins? That's me. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. I say sung, I didn't say sung well. And you got Paul over here. Now you can imagine Paul's like, seriously, Silas? Like you pick now to step into a musical? Like this is, like I'm struggling here. I got no hope. This is not going the way that it's supposed to go. I thought it was going to go. I messed it up. There's nothing that can clean up this mess I got us into. And you get Silas over here. You sure about that, Paul? You nothing? Nothing? Because when I think of that song, there's a line in that says, what can wash away my sins? Come on, Paul, I know you know it. Nothing but the blood of Jesus. And so you got Paul, and Paul's starting to probably get kind of emotional. I'm imagining in my mind right now as he's hearing this, and he's like trying not to show it, trying not to show that it's actually getting to him. And he's like, I don't want to hear it right now, Silas. He's like trying to explain to Silas, like, this is a hope you don't understand. We're in a hopeless situation. We've got no hope in this. When all of a sudden, it's pitch black, all dark. Out of cell block C, another song starts to play. My hope is built on nothing else than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And again, right at this point, and at this point, like Paul's lost it. He's like, he's emotional, he's in tears, and you got Silas over there like, come on, Paul, I know you know it. I know you know this song. And all of a sudden, you just hear Silas, you get worship leaders starting to work the crowd into. He's like, come on, are there any other believers in this place? Anyone else who knows this song? Anyone else who's been struggling, who's felt alone, who's felt forgotten, yet God showed up when it seemed like there was no hope, and it seemed like there was no way out, and it seemed like there was no way out. Come on, if there's any other people who've experienced the grace, the love, the mercy, the deliverance of God, come on, I got to hear you. And all of a sudden, here you've got Paul, and you've got Silas, and you've got the dude from Cell Block C, like, my hope is built on nothing else than Jesus' blood and righteousness. I dare not hope. It just continues on. And here's what's amazing. As they start singing, like, it's just things start to change. Things start to shift. What's so cool about the story is as they praise, as they worship, as they sing, as this connection is made, their perception starts to change and their situation gets transformed. As chains start to fall off. They start to find freedom. They start to find a way out. What once seemed so hopeless, all of a sudden there's this unmistakable glow of hope. And look, I share this because something that's so cool about the story. You see, it wasn't just that Paul found some freedom. He found some hope in this situation. It wasn't just that the other prisoners, they found hope. They found freedom through this. But there was somebody else that was a key part of this story too. See, there was somebody else who, it wasn't just Paul and Silas' situation that started to change because of these connections that were made, but somebody else, this jailer in particular, his situation, his destiny would be changed forever as well because of these connections. See, you got to understand something. Again, and going back to that picture of the stocks, going back to kind of where they're at. The jailer, back then, you got to say the jailer, his main job was to make sure that whoever got locked in, that they stayed there. Like, that was his job. Like if you failed at that job, if a prisoner got out, the penalty for that was death. Like, it was over for you. And so he's doing everything he can. And he knows, especially with Paul and Silas, man, they got a reputation. It seems like they've been able to escape other prisons. So it's like, I'm going to make sure they don't, I'm going to make sure that there's no way they get out of this. So he locks them in the inner cell, and he locks them in these stocks. But here's the mistake that he makes. Here's the mistake that he makes. See, while he locked them in, he failed to lock out. He failed to lock out the access to the key to their deliverance. This key called hope. This key called hope. This key called a Silas. This key called encouragement. This key called somebody else. And listen, I share that with you because I came to tell somebody tonight that the enemy of your soul has made a major miscalculation when it came to you. Listen, there's some of you came in here feeling locked in a bad situation, feeling locked in a bad relationship, feeling locked in a bad state emotionally. But listen, you need to know that the enemy's made a major miscalculation when he let you get here. When he let you get here. Because while he may have locked you in a season of hopelessness, he failed to lock out the very key to your deliverance, the very key to your joy, the very key to your comeback, the very key to unlocking the hope that you have in Jesus Christ. Amen. The key of good connections. The key of entering a place where you get some people who are hey, I'm willing to pray for you. I'd love to be able to support you. I'd love to be able to encourage you. Listen, you want to find some hope, especially in a hopeless situation. I'm telling you, for some of you, the key is some good connections. Key is some good connections. And listen, certainly it was the way for the disciples. It was the way for some of those others around the jail. But what's so cool is that, again, it would also be the way for this prison guard. Check this out. And we'll wrap up with this. Verse 27 through 28 says, the jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword, was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, don't harm yourself. We're all here. We're all here. I love that. Listen, this isn't just about how you experience change in your life, how you start to break from some of the addictions, how you start to break from some of the challenges, how you break free from some things that you feel like have been holding you back and you feel like you're blocked in, how you find hope for your life in hopeless situations. Listen, this isn't just about how we change our life, this is about how we change our world for Christ. In fact, it's interesting when John speaks of Jesus, speaks of this one who's coming into the world. He actually describes Jesus as the light of the world. But what's interesting is later on, a few chapters later, Jesus would actually refer to us, refer to his followers as the light of the world. In other words, it's like a passing on this torch of the mission of reaching people with the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And listen, I share that because I wonder if for us, if we're really serious about being a light in a darkened world, I can't think of a better thing we can do than being a bunch of silences. Being a bunch of people that when you see someone who's hurting, you see someone who's going through something, listen, you might not have all the answers, you might not be able to navigate all their issues, but you can, like Paul and Silas said, hey, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. Listen, that might be the difference. It was certainly the difference for this jailer. The story would go on. The jailer would be so transformed by their simple statement, hey, we're here for you. We're still here for you. Yeah, you might have slipped up. Yeah, you might have not made the wisest decision, but hey, we're still here for you. And as a result, listen, it wasn't so much the songs, it wasn't even so much the message they preached, but that jailer and his family, his entire family would come to encounter the hope in Jesus Christ because there were some people in his life who were willing to sit there and say, regardless of what you do, regardless of where you're at, regardless of what you go through, I'm willing to be here for you. I'm willing to be here for you. The good times, the bad times, the hard times. In fact, that's what that whole 'Tis the Season campaign that we've been talking about is all about. These cards that I encourage you to take a handful of these. Is that listen, these little small acts of generosity where we're just encouraging each of us really as we go through our week, whether it be in the coffee shop, maybe buying someone a cup of coffee or buying someone's dinner or helping someone out in need and just passing out these cards. Really what we're doing is we're trying to share this message. We're trying to pass on hope by simply saying, listen, we're here for you. We're here for you. I'm here for you. You haven't been forgotten. I know that you feel like you're alone. I know you feel like God's maybe forgotten you. But the whole story, the whole message of Christmas is what? It's Emmanuel. It's God is with you. God is with you. And so when we talk about being a light in a darkened world, what better way to be able to do that than to live out that very message in our community, in our job places, in our families. And you never know how that small act might just transform a life for eternity.
Amen.
It's a matter of life and death. The connections we keep, the connections we make, the connections we have. I want to pray for you tonight.